So as a church, we are moving through Jesus' most famous teachings, which is the Sermon on the Mount. And this recording of Jesus' teachings captures God's vision of humanity, what it means to practice the way of Jesus. And for us as Christians, as we subscribe to Jesus' lordship and his teachings, the way in which we're called to live our life is totally different, totally radical. And for Jesus, it was so important that his disciples understood what it means to pick up our cross and follow him. And so just to reiterate, as we've been moving through the Sermon on the Mount since September, and we'll go through until June, there's a lot of good stuff. But Jesus was speaking to his disciples. That's the context. So again, a disciple, a Christian today, and again, in the first century for Jews and Gentiles is just a word for someone who wasn't a Jew, but people that said, yes, I'm gonna follow you, that subscribe to Jesus' lordship. Jesus is talking to that person. And so if Jesus is not your savior, if you're still filling out the church thing, all of these things that we talk about week to week, it's like, don't feel pressure that you gotta live to a certain bar. Jesus is talking to his disciples, to Christians. And so, as I mentioned, almost kind of week to week, but as we unpack the Sermon on the Mount and these various teachings, regarding morality or whatever, naturally for all of us, it's going to be very disturbing, very revealing of our human nature, because it exposes the depths of our selfishness, our pride, our bitterness, everything about us that is sinful and has been shaped by the world. That's what the Sermon on the Mount does. And so for us as Christians, the danger for us is that the teachings of Jesus begin to lose its authority, its power. Again, not because of the potency of Jesus' words, but because as we, again, like in life, we just forget. And the moment we read things or whatever, of the Bible, and it just begins to just impact us less and less. It's an indication that Christ's lordship is drifting farther and farther away. So anyways, let's jump into today's teaching. Verse 33, again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. And so this is the fourth of six illustrations that Jesus is giving. Again, he's kind of unpacking true morality according to God. And so far, we've unpacked overcoming anger, purity in sexual matters, faithfulness in marriage last week. And so today, we're unpacking God's standard for truth and honesty. So it's probably helpful to begin with defining what is an oath. Because oath isn't this day-to-day word that we use, right? And so Google defines it as this: a solemn promise, often invoking a divine witness regarding one's future action or behavior. Other synonyms would be to make a vow, to make a pledge, I promise. And so for us today, as we unpack this text, as Jesus had taught this 2,000 years ago in a specific context and era and place, in order to understand the brevity of what Jesus is talking about regarding oaths, we need to look at the history of oaths and what it meant to the Jewish people, aka the Israelites' experience. And so an oath or vow in this context would be associated, again, for the Israelite people, more to like a courtroom in order to give honest testimony on whatever was going on. And so maybe, while you're streaming Suits or whatever show you like to watch that involves courtrooms, you've probably seen, a scenario in court where the bailiff asks the witness, do you swear to tell the whole truth, the truth, and only the truth? Something along those lines. They say truth a lot, right? And so when an Israelite would take an oath, the statement that they were providing or making wasn't simply just legally binding, it was also eternally binding. Because for the Israelite, for the Hebrew that loves the Lord, Yahweh, they are making the statement, they're swearing on God's name. And so just for context, as Jesus unpacks the Sermon on the Mount, he's often referencing the Torah. Or, for us in our Bible, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And so in Leviticus 19:12, it says this, do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. And so speaking truth and giving honest testimony is part of God's kingdom ethics. That is the standard. You speak truthfully, you give honest testimony. And the Lord models this himself as he provides and gives an oath to Abraham. Here's a bit of context to this in Genesis 17, verse 15 to 19. God also said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that you will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her. Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abraham said to God, if only Ishmael might live under your blessing. It was his other son with a different woman. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant, my promise or my oath with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And so if you're unfamiliar with this narrative, we unpacked a bit of it last summer. We focused more on Hagar and Ishmael. But that's for another time, or you can check out that sermon. Otherwise, Abram and his wife, Sarai, are very old. As Abraham kind of reveals to us, right? He's 100 years old, his wife is 90. And here in this context, they love the Lord. And the Lord gives this oath, this promise that those two, 190, they're gonna have a child in their old age. And so we see that they get a little bit of a rebrand. They got new names, Abraham and Sarah, right? And the Lord promises that through their biological son, not this other kind of half son going on over here, but the son between Abraham and Sarah, who they will name Isaac, it's through him, his descendants, his lineage, that the Lord would birth this nation that is going to bless other nations, which will become the Israelites. And it's really a prefiguring of the church to come. So anyways, a few chapters later, we see Isaac has become a young man. And often, I think if you've grown up in church or you've heard this story, and we'll be jumping into Genesis 22, we see that Isaac is accompanying his father Abraham, and they're going to go build this altar. And often, when we read the English text, it might say boy or whatever, and we just assume that Isaac was like 10 years old. But in actuality, he would have probably been in his 20s or maybe 30s when you actually go into the text, just for context. So in this chapter, in Genesis 22, we see Abraham's faith in the oath that God had promised him a few chapters back in 17. Here's what happens. Genesis 22, verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, Father, yes, my son? Abraham replied, the fire and the wood are here, Isaac said. But where is the lamb for the burnt offering? A bit of an awkward conversation. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son for the Lord. And at a glance, that almost seems like very bad parenting, right? Like why, like Abraham doesn't even question God. He doesn't even fight back to be like, can I sacrifice something else or someone else other than my only son? And again, as I mentioned, like Isaac is not just a teenager, like he's a full-on adult, 20s, probably 30s. And so at this point in the text, we know that Isaac is not married and he has no kids, which means he does not have anyone to kind of take his name, anyone to, take on the promise that God had made through Abraham and Sarah, that through their son Isaac, a nation would come. He's not married, no kids. However, Abraham doesn't once question the Lord. I don't know if you caught it, but he brings two other servants to kind of help them. And he tells him, as he tells them to wait, he's like, hey, just hold down the fort, watch my donkey, we will be back. We, not just I, we. And so this entire time, Abraham, in his mind, is thinking of the promise, the oath, the vow, the pledge that God had made to him in Genesis 17. And so because Abraham knew that God had promised, it's through your son Isaac. It's not through anybody else. It's not through Ishmael or any other sons that you might have in the future. It's through Isaac. So in his mind, he's like, either God just divinely intervenes or God raises my son from the dead. That is the level of faith that Abraham has, because the God that we serve, the God that we worship, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a God who keeps his promise. So either way, regardless of whatever happened, Abraham knew that his son would be alive. He knew that he would return to his son. They would have dinner with Sarah. And this is the standard of what an oath meant to the Hebrews and eventually to the Jewish people. It was sacred. However, over time, as the years continue to pile up, and within Judaism, this led to people eventually substituting different words in place of God's name. Remember, it was a sacred thing. You would swear on the name of the Lord. But eventually, people tried to finesse their way a little bit around these things because it was this sacred and powerful thing. If I said, like, on God's name, I'm going to take you to Super Baba, it's like, you know you're going to go to Super Baba. There's no if, but, or when, or I might bail. It's like, I'm committed because I've invoked the Lord's name. And so people tried to finesse their way around it. And so they would try to say like other kind of religious type of words while still appearing truthful. And so that's what Jesus is addressing in verses 34 to 36. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. The sacredness around taking oaths and giving an honest testimony became distorted over time. And so what Jesus is doing here, and what he's saying in these these few verses, he's calling out people, and especially the Pharisees or the religious leaders at this time, because what they had turned oath keeping into is a means of manipulating people. So, they're saying like, I swear on like the temple, I swear on Jerusalem, the holy city, all these things that sound legit, but they're actually manipulating, knowing that they don't actually have to be truthful to their word. When I was in elementary school, one of the games that we would often play at recess or lunch was this game called Manhunt. I don't know, maybe other people have played it with a different name or whatever, but it's simply a variation of tag, okay? And so, we run out, and I'm probably grade 4 or 5, and someone is it, okay? And when they tag someone, they're it as well. They're both it. Then when those two, tag someone, then all 4 of them are it. So then by the end of like recess or lunchtime, like whoever is the last to be it or whatever, is like I guess you win the game, all right? So that was a game that I like kind of grew up playing. And so, we're playing, and one of the things that we would do, so let's say like, I'm like running around the playground, I'm doing all my spins and stuff, and then I see like Josiah from away, and I'm like, I don't know if he's it or not. So what I would do in the game, I'd go like this. I just put the peace sign up. And either he would, just smile and keep coming towards me, right? It's like, okay, this guy's it. Okay, I got to run. Or he puts up his peace sign too to indicate, oh, he's not it. That was just like a rule. That was a standard. Like, we just all honored that, us grade 5 kids, right? So for whatever reason, this memory sticks out in my mind, this guy named Cody. And so he's like, I see him from across, right? And I'm like, hey, I don't even have to say anything. I just put the peace sign up. And he's making his way towards me, and he puts the sign up. I was like, all right, this guy's good. And so, I walk towards him. He walks towards me, and I'm like, hey, who's been tagged so far? And he just puts his arm on my shoulder. You and me. I whispered, Judas. I didn't say that. But I was like upset. I'm like, you just broke one of the most sacred rules ever. You threw me the peace sign. And he was like, oh, but I had my fingers crossed. I'm like, what does that mean? I have no idea what that means. And then all of a sudden, this phenomenon of like your fingers crossed just completely nullifies what you say. And all of a sudden, there's this new element to the game, right? So if like you're playing and you put the peace signs, like show me both hands, then eventually people are like, oh, I was crossing my toes. It's like, okay, I'm not gonna play with you anymore. This is not fun. And so what the Pharisees did, and I guess in what Cody was doing, again, what he did to the peace sign is what the Pharisees did to oathing. They distorted and diminished its purpose and meaning. And so by Jesus' day, in the first century, oathing had become nothing more than evasive swearing. It was simply a way for usually Pharisees or these religious leaders to push their agenda forward. And so for Jews who knew they were not fully telling the truth, or they were omitting some facts that were important to know, because they feared and loved the Lord, they were afraid of swearing God's name. And so again, that's why they started swearing other things that sounded legit, that sounded holy and respectable. Like, I swear on Jerusalem, I swear on the temple, I swear on the earth. It sounds legit, and they probably, sounded very theatrical, but at the bottom line is they were manipulative. And that is the context in which Jesus is trying to address. It's kind of like when you hear someone say, like, I swear on my parents' life. Like they want to get serious. They want you to understand like what they're saying is very, very stern. Oathing, vowing, or having to swear by something is actually an indication that you're not trustworthy. The late theologian John Stott puts it this way: swearing or oath-taking is really a pathetic confession of our own dishonesty. You might be thinking, Jared, so you said that God made an oath with Abraham, and now you're saying oaths are a bad thing, but God did it. So are you saying God is bad? Or you're losing me, Jared. Come on, you're losing me. In our teaching text, when Jesus says, again, he's telling his disciples to not swear, to not make these oaths. But he's not forbidding us to take oaths. He's saying you shouldn't even need to do this anymore. And so again, when we zoom out, when we jump back up to the 30,000-foot view and we look at the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is not even just building upon, he's like laying a new foundation of the Torah, of the 10 Commandments, right? Like, when we talk about adultery, it's not just the physical act of having an affair. It starts with your eyes. It starts with conception in your mind. Like, Jesus is bringing the bar to a new level. And so what he's saying here is, with oaths, like, we shouldn't even be using this because we should be truthful and honest people as God's sons and daughters. It's interesting that when Jesus was on trial before the Sanhedrin, or the high priest, the Jewish authorities, before as the Passion narrative begins, it's interesting because as he is put under oath in this court setting, he chooses to not say anything. Matthew 26, verse 62. Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, "Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?" But Jesus remained silent. the high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. You have said so, Jesus replied. And so Jesus is being charged under oath to reveal who he is, right? To reveal his identity. Yet Jesus refuses to speak. And he gives this classic, cryptic response. And so what Jesus is trying to get here for us to understand, what he is teaching, he's not saying this is completely forbidden. It's not the absolute exclusion of all oaths, but he is teaching how oaths can become a means of manipulating people. And again, as he is sharing this, obviously he's just talking to people that would have begun to use this kind of form of speech and vernacular, but he really is trying to call out the Pharisees and the religious leaders that used this means of manipulating, this distortion of oaths to further their agenda. And so Jesus goes on to say, verse 37, all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. If you have to strengthen your word, if yes or no is not enough and people do not believe your word at face value, it means that people have learned to not trust your word. After time, after events, after broken promises, that is your baseline. That is what your character has revealed to people. Growing up, if you didn't know, I'm Filipino. I speak more Japanese than Filipino. It's weird. But not that I attended a lot of Filipino gatherings, but I did attend a few Filipino gatherings. That's where I got to know Desiree and Jesse, when we were kids, and Jesse was in diapers back in the day. We were just little kids, and we would go to Uncle Willie's buffet or whatever. That's where all the Filipino gatherings were. And I quickly realized at these Filipino gatherings, time works differently. And in the sense, I remember with my parents, we come on time, let's say party for, whoever, it's 5 p.m. We'd get there. Oh yeah, we're here for this person's birthday. And they're oh, they haven't arrived yet. Okay, so just hang out. Sometimes my parents would just drop me off, and so I'm just there, just waiting. And then, it's 5:30. Maybe a couple people come, but not the hosts, not the hosts. For, if it's let's say it's, I don't know, Anthony's birthday. It's his family's not even here yet. 6 p.m. goes around. There's a few more people coming. And then 6:30 rolls around. It's okay, almost everyone's here. And then 7 p.m., that's when we start kind of partying or whatever. And so I don't know if it's just a Filipino thing. I've heard that in some other cultures, they would share this, I don't know, practice value. I'm not really sure. But there's this thing called Filipino time. And if you say, hey, we're having this Filipino party at my place, 6 p.m., what we all know is you're gonna leave your place at 7 and then come at my place at 7:30. For whatever reason, that's just what it is. And I'm not sure if that's a cultural thing or whatever, but it's just a thing that I actually did a bit of reading on it, and it's weird. I don't know if it's true, but I saw that in when Philippines was colonized. I know the theological words, guys. I don't know this other, colonized. But apparently, something happened, and when you would arrive late, it was actually an indication of your status. So the later you were, it revealed you were higher in. Anyways, that was just some brief reading I was doing. I don't know if that's legit. But anyways, Filipino time. But the thing for us as followers of Jesus, because again, a lot of our faith, what it means to be a follower of Jesus and why we see a lot of the imagery and language is very familial. It's sons and daughters of the living God. It's family. We are given a new identity. An identity that trumps whatever that we come into this world with, whether we're Japanese, Filipino, or whatever. Your career, because we draw our identity from our career. It is simply in your daughtership. It's in your sonship. And so as a Christian, if it's saying, if you're saying you're going to show up at a certain time, or if you're saying, hey, I'm going to borrow this, I'm going to give it back, or you're going to say, hey, I'm going to have this to you by then, or whatever the case is, when we fail to do that, we're actually compromising people's understanding of who Jesus is, because we're supposed to be citizens of a different kingdom. We are held to a different ethic, a different standard, a different morality. And in my prep, one of the things that I was reading, which I felt even quite convicted. And a few of these theologians were just saying even over-exaggerating is a form of this kind of like word manipulation, because you're deviating from the truth. And the fact is, the more that we deviate from the truth, the more the enemy has a hold on us. And that's what Jesus is saying in that last verse in 37. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this, even if it's just like a little bit exaggeration, is from the evil one. I've been pastoring for 10 years. And there's this thing called like church math or church numbers, right? And like, let's say, we've got like, I was a youth pastor, and like, let's say, we got like, I don't know, 60 or 70 people that attended. And then I have like, a meetup with other youth pastor friends. I'm like, yeah, we had like over 200 people last night. It's just church math, right? It's like, or maybe you've been in a space where it's like, yeah, close your eyes if you want to just pray, or put up your hands. And there's like 2 people that put up their hands. You're like, wow, just hands all over the space, right? For whatever reason, us pastors, we just suck at math, right? But what's crazy is that Jesus is speaking against this. He's saying like anything that deviates from the truth is from the enemy. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Hard stop. And so for all of us, myself, like every pastor for sure, because we suck at math, Jesus is talking to us because we are failing in embodying who Jesus is to others, especially in our cultural moment where people have been hurt by the church. Right? People do not they're so apprehensive and defensive, and it makes sense because they've probably been hurt because Christians have broken their promise. Even as simple as saying, getting invited to a birthday and you say, I don't know, you mark yes on the Facebook event and then you don't show up. Like these are moments when we are such a hindrance to the gospel. And so if a friend asks you, will you go with me to the thing tomorrow? And you're like, yes. And they're like, are you sure? That's an indication that you have a history of bailing. You have a history of canceling. You have a history of being unfaithful. And you might say, yeah, I promise I'll be there. But if that's you, if you experience that often, your friend is probably pressing you because your character is not trustworthy, because you have failed to show up when they needed you the most. And that is the opposite of who Jesus is. Our framework of evangelism, I feel sometimes is so warped because the front door should not just be our gathering at the Sound House at 33 West 8th Avenue. The front door for people to experience Jesus is us showing up in people's lives. It's going to the pub, it's going for coffee, it's having a watch party for whatever. It's showing up to the things that we get invited to. If you often make promises with no intention of fulfilling them, this is what Jesus is saying is wrong, and it represents the evil one. And so what is Jesus saying? What's the big idea to this cluster of verses? All he's saying is this: you don't have to swear you're telling the truth. Just tell the truth. If you can't make it, don't say that, I might stop by, be like, I just need a day to myself. I just need an evening. I'm gonna watch this anime. I just need to be by myself. Just be straight up honest. That's what Jesus is saying. It's not this crazy theological, big idea. Let your yes be yes, let your no be no. When you say yes, commit. When you say no, you're good. Chill out. Go for ramen. We dance around all of these things because we're so worried. We have to impress. We have to make sure we're at people's expectations all the time. And honestly, I struggle with that. As a pastor, I feel like I always have to give my time to people. But at the end of the day, if I don't prioritize those greatest commandments, love God and love others, if I can't love God first, then I will not love others, even if I have good intentions. As a follower of Jesus, your inability to be faithful, honest, and committed to people reveals more about your relationship with God than you realize. Because you literally become a roadblock for people experiencing the gospel. Because you might be the only representation of the gospel, representation of who Jesus is. Because some people, they're never gonna walk either into a church space for the first time or they're not gonna walk back. And so you are the church. And we wonder why people are so jaded and why they call Christians hypocrites and two-faced. And so as sons and daughters of the living God, we're called to be honest, faithful, committed in everyday life, not just at church things, in everyday life. So whether it's making plans, just going for dinner or lunch with friends or family, or it's saying, I don't know, yes to an additional project at work, or maybe responding to your friend's invite for CrossFit or whatever. If you know you're gonna bail, just say no. You know what I mean? But that practical first step of being true to what we say will have a huge impact on the people around us. And they're gonna begin to wonder, why are you so just straight up? Like, you don't really ghost people. When you say no, like, you've got firm boundaries. Why? There's an opportunity to present the gospel. Let your yes be yes, your no be no. And as the Apostle Paul writes to the believers in Philippi, he says this in Philippians 4, verse 8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whether you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Let's pray. Lord, as we, just kind of sit in your teachings on what it means to be faithful, to be committed, I'm sure there's probably all kinds of feelings. I'm sure to a degree all of us feel kind of exposed. But I pray, Lord, I just rebuke any shame or anything like that. That's from the enemy. Lord, you love us. You love these people. They are your children. And Lord, I pray we would be reminded that you are a promise-keeping God. What you speak happens. What you say is true. Lord, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. You know every detail of our lives. As your scriptures say, you know how many hairs are on our heads. And so, Lord, as your church, as fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, help us to be a people of your presence. Help us to embody what it means to be your hands and feet. Lord, I pray even in this moment, maybe there's people in our lives, maybe coworkers, friends, family, that we are in relationship with, but are distant. Maybe they've experienced hurt. Maybe for them the word church is an anxious word. So I pray, Lord, you'd help us to redeem that for people. Lord, your plan for evangelism isn't just random people speaking on Sundays, Lord. It's your church, it's your people, it's us in everyday life, sitting with people, creating time, being true to our word, committing when we say yes, and creating healthy boundaries when we say no. And so may you, Lord, continue to have your way in us as a church, the capital C church here in Vancouver, in a culture that's so transient, so aloof. Help us to be faithful to people because you are so faithful to us. I pray this in your name.